behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Welcome back, my friends, to the GTM pod. Thanks for rocking with us. I know you've probably had a busy day. Who knows? Maybe you're at the gym getting a sweat in. Maybe you're in between meetings on your lunch break. We appreciate you spending the time to jam with us and talk everything go-to-market, scaling companies, and try and get a behind-the-scenes look on how things actually go down in our crazy world. I got a great guest to do that. I'm joined by Eli Rubel. Eli, welcome, man.
Hey, thanks. I'm excited to be here, Scott.
Pumped to have you, my friend. Pumped to have you. And we were talking before this, and you have a 3-week-old at home right now.
That's right. That's right.
That must be wild. You don't look like it. You look great, man. It looks like you're at least getting some sleep.
You know, it's the beauty lights. It's all the baby milk that I've been putting on my face.
That's the secret. All right, you heard it here first. Get the baby milk under the eyes, and you're good to go. I love it, man. So quickly for the audience. So Eli is the CEO of MatterMade, also the CEO of NoBoringDesign. Have to shout you guys out. You have done some great work for GTM Fund and now GTM Now. You'll see a nice, slick-looking video on this podcast, intro videos coming soon, and that's straight from NoBoringDesign and some other things. So it's been great working with your team. But Eli has also served as a marketing advisor to some really big companies like Dropbox, Loom, Productboard, and a ton of others. You know, those are fantastic brands. It's interesting. I look at a lot of those brands, and although a lot of them are like B2B, they've done a really good job at making themselves almost seem like B2C brands. And I imagine you had something to do with that. And then prior to MatterMade, Eli was the founding CEO of Glider.com, which he actually led through a successful acquisition to FPX, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Anything else I missed there? Anything else to highlight throughout your career?
No, I mean, yeah, it's been a pretty winding journey. I think you gave a very concise version that made it sound nice and linear and like it all makes sense. But to me, when I think back on it, it's a bit of a winding mess with some really great high points and some nice wins along the way. But yeah, I think it was great.
I feel that. Yeah, it's never linear. I do an exercise like once a year where I kind of take the new things I've learned, and then I'll go and like map out my story again of like kind of how it all happened, and then like things kind of new connections are made. And every time I do that, I feel like it becomes more linear, and it's kind of misleading. You know, if you had the full story, it would probably take like 2 hours to explain. But cool, man. So let's dive right into it. So worked with all these, incredible companies. And I know one thing that is really top of mind for you now and has been throughout kind of your entire career is this idea of demand efficiency. And I think demand generation gets a lot of love. People talk about that all the time. We need demand, we need leads. Let's pump out as many as we can, get those MQLs. But measuring how efficient that demand is coming is incredibly important. So why don't we start by just defining what demand efficiency is to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So demand efficiency, that topic came up for us as this repeating pattern in our work where, yes, you could throw more budget at a problem, but at the end of the day, if the unit economics don't make sense, that's going to be a fleeting proposition at the board level, certainly, and then that trickles down. And so rather than focusing on, growth at all costs, which I think the market was really into for a little while there, and everybody was having a party, we approach everything first from how can we establish baseline cost to acquire metrics through marketing channels? And then once we have those baseline cost to acquire metrics, how can we derive demand efficiency in those channels before looking for any form of scale in the channels themselves. And so demand efficiency as a definition is the evaluation of all of the different microsurfaces and growth levers throughout the buyer's journey, and how those all stack up together. It's actually, we brought it together in what we call the demand efficiency framework, which is something that we open sourced. It used to be what I would probably consider our secret sauce at MatterMade. It used to be part of our onboarding process and how we would perform a gap evaluation to determine like where is low-hanging fruit, where are companies messing it up, where is there room to just drive efficiency and then ultimately more pipeline and revenue. And when the market took a shit, I realized that there was an opportunity to share this and just like put it out into the open, give it to everyone. And so the demand efficiency framework was born, where you can go and take the evaluation yourself. It takes about 7 minutes. It walks through a series of questions and it'll actually score and rank the companies against other companies in the same industries, same funding type, or same funding round, and show them how efficient they are as compared to their peers. So long-winded answer to demand efficiency and how it was born.
No, I love it. We like long-winded answers when they're valuable. So we'll make sure that goes in the show notes. I think anyone who is a marketer that is listening to this, go take that and see how you stack up. So you mentioned, you got to know where you're starting from. So you need this, baseline cost of acquisition through all your channels. There's a lot of startups that listen to this, a lot of startup founders. How long does that usually take? Like how long do I do that before I can feel comfortable at like a baseline? How long does it usually take?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different schools of thought on this, and I certainly worked with some founders or executives over the years where strong opinions are held, and there has to be a bit of a debate on like when is it good enough versus stat sig is a lot different than good enough, and so it's really up to the team at the end of the day to decide. For us, we typically, to be very quantified about it, we typically like to see $25,000 minimum per channel over the course of 30 days to get some sort of strong signal. It can absolutely be done for less in a shorter period of time, but your confidence would be lower as you reduce the amount and the duration. So for us, kind of a good starting point for each channel is that amount of budget over that period of time.
Got it. And this might be a tough question, but it might be super valuable to those folks listening. Could you share some data around what is good efficiency through channels? And we can take just for a B2B SaaS company, mid-size, what does good look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The interesting thing about the demand efficiency framework is that we get much more granular with the definition of good. So there's a high level score that's just going to like your efficiency score. And if we look at right now, I have on my other screen pulled up the highest score anyone's ever received, 173, 151, and then pretty quickly it drops down. And those are companies like ZoomInfo, 6sense, Grammarly, Sendoso, who have taken the evaluation. They're at the top for efficiency. But very quickly, the numbers go down into like 40, 30. Like it really, really changes very quickly. And to answer your question, I think like the talking heads usually look at big levers and they'll come up with an efficiency metric for demand capture, demand creation. It's like how much was our cost to drive SQLs or these sorts of things. And that would be one way to look at it. The other way though is looking at all the different initiatives that we call them microsurfaces. So where are there microsurfaces in the buyer journey that have room for single digit percentage improvement in conversion, but there exists maybe 25 to 50 of these microsurfaces in each various stage of the funnel. And so what tends to happen in these fast moving organizations and startups, and I'm veering it's a bit of a tangent from your original question, so you can rein me back in here in a second, but these single points, microsurfaces, where it's 1 to 3% potential for improvement in conversion, they often feel like a nice to have because it's too small. Like 1 to 3%. We've got like the board's yelling at us about our paid spend. We're getting pressure on our product team's getting pressure. Like all these pressures. 1 to 3% isn't big enough to matter. But what ends up happening is now you have like 25 to 50 of these that are going ignored. And so I think the savvy marketer nowadays who is looking to drive demand efficiency, that's where you actually need to look. You need to look at all of those ignored surfaces, group them by commonalities, and then put them into sprints. So this is where you can go and say, okay, we can drive like maybe 15 to 20% efficiency overall if we hammer through these 10 little micro projects. And that, 15 to 20% could be huge if you're talking about the whole marketing budget. And when, you're looking at companies like we work with that can have budgets north of $500,000 a month, that's a lot of increase in efficiency.
Yeah, no kidding. So I love this idea. Can you give me an example of maybe some common microsurfaces that are often overlooked?
Totally. So we could start with some of the ones that are talked about, but I consider part of this equation, like the handoff from sales to marketing. I get so frustrated when companies will get really down on marketing performance, or they'll get really obsessed with like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? But then they're throwing good opportunities through the funnel. What opportunities they do have, they're throwing through the funnel, and they don't have like a standard operating procedure in how those leads are handled, right? And so it's like, if every conversation is handled differently and there's no standard there, why are we even focusing on more? We should be focusing on converting better and put our attention there and then go, right? And so that's an example. One that I'm very hot on these days, which maybe this will be part of my spicy takes later, but I think it's fascinating that people often, they'll set their brand identity, their look and feel really early on. Like they'll set it when they're still trying to be a viable company. Then they see some success, they raise some money, they, start racking up their ARR, and they're launching campaigns with meaningful budget behind it every week, using the same creative that they created when they were a 3-person team, that their CEO, who knows nothing about design and really didn't care, just wanted it to be like, oh yeah, it looks good enough, ship it. But now they're adhering to these as though it's like religion, and they're not experimenting with creative because of that. He's like, oh, that's off brand, we can't do that. And so, if you think about a company that's spending, this is, for later stage, but like $100,000 a month on paid social, and their team is not innovating on one of the more meaningful variables in conversion, which is like, if I'm scrolling through LinkedIn or if I'm scrolling through Facebook and I see ads, I'm going to keep scrolling. But if I'm scrolling and there's something there that's unique, that stands out, it breaks the mold, I'm going to stop. And now I'm going to give the copywriting an opportunity to entice me, right? So it's usually in that order. It's like there's this emotional visual impact that needs to stop the scroll. That gives you permission for them, like to feed them some copywriting and give them an offer. And then maybe the offer is enticing enough, they click. And so I find it wild as one of these microsurfaces that companies would rather adhere to, just because they think they're supposed to, some sort of stale look and feel, even if it means that they could double conversion rates in these channels because they have fresh standout visuals. They just sometimes aren't willing to do that. And so this is like another example of a microsurface that is often ignored.
Yeah, that's a great example. I guess there's a balance there, right? How often do you suggest that companies revisit their brand guidelines, brand identity? Do you think that's something that should always be evolving? And then is there a trade-off there with, you've put so much time and resources into building this asset and now it's changing in a way?
Yeah, you don't want to move it around too much because it'll defeat the purpose and people won't know, they won't be able to recognize you at a glance, which you want. Obviously, you want brand recognition. But if you think about the industry in cycles, right? Like there was a period of time where everyone was copying Intercom. They're like, oh, Intercom has that look and feel. And like all of a sudden, boom, all the startups have like illustrations on their websites. And that became really hot. And then for a period of time, people were copying Notion, like more recently Notion, right? It was like, oh, this is like the simplicity and the emojis. And like everybody was doing that. And now it's Figma, like, oh, the color palette and the fonts. And everybody's like, that feels fresh and modern. And these seem to follow maybe like a 3 to 4 year cycle. And so I think rather than setting it and forgetting it. I think you try to stay ahead of that and you say, hey, we're going to have like a 3-year brand cycle where 3 to 4 years, where we pin it. We do something really out there and cool that stands out. Like I think Stored is another company that has done a really good job of this with their website. And they're in like a space where you would not expect to have an innovative looking site. And they've won a bunch of awards because of it. And they just stand out in the market. Like people are like, oh yeah, we know them. 3 years from now, that site's probably going to feel stale. It's not going to be like the talk of the industry, but so they have this opportunity to get out ahead of it again. And in the meantime, if you do it right, you build a brand that's extensible. So to your question of like, you can still have fresh ads that are being changed up and you're pushing it every month, coming up with new stuff, as long as the underlying brand foundations were created in a way that allow for that creativity and experimentation. And then that's obviously much less expensive. You can do that on the cheap as opposed to like some grandiose brand refresh.
Of course. And then going back to the original question, and let's just talk about, let's say, socials. A lot of talk I hear of like LinkedIn ads. They're so expensive. They're hard to convert. What is a good conversion rate, for a B2B SaaS company, like on an ad?
Yeah, I mean, that question is really hard to answer without like drilling down, right? It's like a really good conversion rate in fintech when you're, advertising if you're advertising to banks and specific, like it depends on your ICP and your buyer persona and the channel. So I'd say like the confluence of those 3 things, then you'd have some sort of like, what's the industry standard there? I don't have that in front of me, but your mileage varies greatly based on those things. I think that's actually one of the problems with how, marketers are sometimes held to industry benchmarks, where it's like, yes, industry like tech wide maybe, but like if you're like a fintech marketer as opposed to like MarTech, those are very, very different worlds with very different buying cycles and buying behaviors. And so to expect like a blended average or some sort of like universal truth when it comes to what good looks like, when we approach our engagements, we always approach them through the lens of like, it doesn't really matter what the industry is doing broad strokes. It matters like, where are you today? Where do you need to be for your business to be viable? And how quickly can we get you there? So it's always about like, you create fresh benchmarks to determine like, where are they today? And then figure out what it's going to take to move the needle out of that red zone.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, if you're targeting CMOs who are getting absolutely bombarded, it's gonna be very different than other personas. I love it, man. Okay. Anything else that folks should think about when they're trying to analyze and improve their demand efficiency?
I mean, the thing that I like to do is suggest that they go through those questions with their other leaders. Don't just have the marketer do it. Have like marketing and sales sit down, maybe even CS and product in the room and go through and take the 7 minutes together, because it'll do 2 things. One, it will actually surface like talking points and programs that you might consider as a group, but really it'll spark some debates about how we, the organization taking the survey, like how we do things, and the things that we might just be doing because that's like us on autopilot, but maybe it's not the best way to be going about it. I've seen some really interesting conversations sparked as a result of those questions.
Pulls you back to first principles thinking
Exactly.
a little bit. Let's transition a little bit to story time. Always my favorite part of this. We love speaking through stories, and this one is super interesting on kind of this acquisition that happened. And everyone, I think, looks at acquisitions. They see the big TechCrunch article or they see it on LinkedIn and they're like, wow, what an amazing outcome. Everyone's pumped. They must be so happy. It was probably all sunshine and rainbows. We just acquired, Sales Hacker back. We'll be rebranding it as GTM now. Made a bunch of announcement. Everyone's congratulations. Everyone's super pumped. But behind the scenes, there's a lot going on. Doesn't always work out exactly how you plan. So I'd love to transport you back to, that time period. What was going on? How did it all go down? And maybe some of the stickier parts of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like when you chat with other founders who've sold their business, I think not everybody, the general like party line, if you will, is what you said. It's like, yeah, the headline, here's the headline, like you share the little blurb and it was like, oh, congrats. But I've noticed as soon as you open up to any other founders who've sold their businesses about any kind of like real vulnerability within the story, the floodgates open. Like I don't think I've maybe met like one or two founders who are like, no, yeah, it was all pretty clean and like went well, everything was fine, nothing was out of the ordinary. But most of them are like, oh, let me tell you about, and then you go off and have a couple of beers and have a fun show and tell. So yeah, but back to rewind time, my first SaaS company, Glider, contract lifecycle management company, we were acquired very early on in our life cycle, like right before Series A. We were in the process of closing Series A, or attempting to close Series A, I should say. And this company came out of the blue. They were basically like, hey, we're going to acquire you. And I was like, we're not for sale. And they're like, we're going to get you an LOI before you land in Portland. And I was like, that's cool. I guess I'll read it, but we're not for sale.
And you didn't know them at all? No prior engagement up until this point?
Prior to that moment, that conversation, they had sent me, their corp dev guy had sent me a DM on LinkedIn. I was going to be in San Francisco for Dreamforce. And I was meeting with our investors trying to figure out like what was going on with our round. So I was there for Dreamforce and the investor conversations. And this guy was like, hey, can we get coffee while you're like, I'm at Dreamforce? And for whatever reason, I said yes. I had some time to kill. And I show up to the room and it's not one person, it's their entire executive team has flown in from Minnesota. They're all wearing suits. I'm in like typical startup swag. And yeah, so it was very like unsure of why we were having this meeting and what it was actually about. And I went and had a conversation with my investors, got down to the bottom of the stairs, and the corp dev guy was like, hey, can you come back to I think it was the St. Regis. He was like, can you come back to St. Regis? I was like, no, I'm about to miss my flight to Portland. He's like, I really think you should come back to St. Regis. Like the chairman of the board is here and wants to meet with you. She wasn't able to make it to the meeting. And so again, same thing. For some reason, I decided like, sure, what do I have to lose? I'll miss my flight and go do this thing. Had the meeting with them. And that was the first, she stuck her hand out and she was like, hi, I'm the chairman of the board. I'm going to buy your company. And then the whole dialogue I started with earlier ensued. So yeah. And it was like interesting timing where we weren't in the strongest place as a company. So candidly, like this was an amazing option for us if what she put in the LOI was to pan out. And so I was like, yeah, let's go for it. The investors were down. It was going to be a life-changing amount of money for me. The investors were going to make some money. And so it felt like our best option. Getting to the part where, the story, so boom, it happens. TechCrunch headline, woo, acquisition. I get to pat myself on the back and people seem to take me more seriously all of a sudden. But the reality was they hadn't paid. They paid a tranche to the investors up front, and made them whole at least. They hadn't seen their upside yet, but they made them whole enough to like, oh, they're not going to be mad. And then fast forward, like I'm doing my earn out, whatever, but the earning out isn't happening. Like they're delaying and delaying and delaying.
But you're working, you're putting in the sweat equity, but just the upside's not coming.
Yeah. They're like, oh, like we just, give us a couple more months, like we're figuring things out. And it just started to feel really fishy. There's probably a lot to the story that I shouldn't tell on a recorded podcast, but we'll leave it as spicy as I've already divulged. We'll leave it at that. TLDR. I ended up having to get a lawyer involved, and a professor at Stanford who teaches contract law negotiation was like, "Oh man, I hate it when people do shit like this. Like, I'll help you for free."
What's this guy's name? We got to know this guy's name. What a hero!
Such a good guy. I met him through True Ventures does like their founder education camp thing. I don't know what they call it. True University. And he was one of the speakers. And afterwards I approached him and I was like, hey, hypothetically, if you were in this situation, what would you do? And that was the beginning of a very nice relationship. And so they ended up settling, but it took 3 or 4 years, like from the date of acquisition. And then to kind of go more into that, that's a weird fucking headspace to be in as like someone who you're trying to feel the confidence of someone who's sold their company, but you have like $0 in your bank account to show for it. And you're like, well, in theory, like I've done really well. In theory, this is solid. And you're having meetings with people and like, selling your own confidence. But then in reality, it was like, maybe this has happened. Maybe it hasn't. Like technically. So I don't know. It's funny though. I've met a lot of founders who have similar-ish kind of like things get weird after the fact stories about acquisitions.
Well, thanks for being candid and sharing. It's so important that people hear the other side of these articles and headlines. And I can imagine that headspace would be bizarre. It's like, intellectually, I know what I did rocked, but like I'm looking around and this life isn't rocking right now.
Exactly.
I haven't been able to upgrade in real life yet. No, well, congrats on that acquisition. I guess the question is, how do you combat against that? How do you? I'm sure you've warned a lot of founders now in your day and given them advice. What advice would you have for yourself if you were to do it all over again?
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting. I was very young when that acquisition happened. I was like 23, and so that was, I think, one of the hardest parts was I assumed people always would have like good, generally humane intentions in mind. Like the people would be treating each other generally with respect, and they'd be trying to get a better deal and like find some upside where they can, but that they wouldn't be so malicious as to try to like take something fully and just not ever intend to pay for it, hypothetically. And so the advice I'd give to myself, one would just be around like, you do have to be aware that there are some bad actors out there. And the way that you protect yourself from that is like, if someone puts a contract or an agreement in front of you and there aren't assurances that you feel would be fair and like mutually reasonable, there's probably a reason that those assurances aren't there. Like if they're not willing to, in this case, like put money in escrow or, whatever it is, have like a third party that's governing the release of funds, these sorts of like fairly standard things in certain transactions. It's not just like, oh, that's not their vibe, that's not their style, like you just have to go with it. It's like, no, like there's an intent behind that very specific decision that they've made to draw a hard line on that. And so you should read into that and you should be uncomfortable and push back. Because at the end of the day, if people intend to do they intend to do what's in the contract or what's not in the contract. So
good advice for sure. Lock those contracts up and then learning that, not saying something in the contract is saying something. There is intent behind everything, whether it's in there or it's not in there. I hear you on the bad actors. That's unfortunately a lesson many of us have to learn. But I do love the beauty in your story that there's also really damn good actors as well in this professor that helped you kind of navigate this position. I love it. And I guess like through just like generally, like when you were in your earnout period, because I know a lot of people struggle with that time period too. It can be a big shift. The culture's different. You're no longer in control. You're not making the decisions you used to. Any learnings from that side that you could share with founders?
Vet your acquirer out as much as you can. Like if it feels like it's going to be a challenge culturally, then it probably is. And I wouldn't assume that you can be this like driving force of change inside of, especially if you're the smaller organization. We were getting acquired by a 30-year-old company that like Midwestern company, and we were this, West Coast tech startup. And so we were going to bend to their will and not the other way around, even though, it was sold in a very different way. It was sold to us like, oh, you're going to be the center of innovation and you're going to breathe this new life force into our way of doing things. And we want this fresh perspective. And I think that's all fine to say until you have like a 47 or 50-year-old director who's been in that role for 15 years at the same company. And they've got some smart ass 23-year-old telling them like, why their ideas could be like how their ideas could be more fresh and like different approaches. And they're not to be ageist about it, but they're like, yo, fucker, like I'm not gonna listen to you.
Who are you?
Yeah, exactly. Like go back, go home.
I have a kid your age.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome, man. Well, again, congrats. It's amazing to see you, obviously keep building, apply some of those lessons you talk about, into all the cool things you're doing now. I want to transition over to a listener question. I like this one. I get asked it all the time, and it's a broad question, so it's a really hard one to answer because all these questions. I think the true answer is it depends. There's always context, but we'll do our best. This is from a founder, and I'm assuming it's extremely early stage. What is the first marketing hire we should make? So, in your opinion, what is kind of the maybe it doesn't even have to be like title. Like, what does the makeup of that person look like?
I have, as you can imagine, and I can elaborate for the listeners who don't know my background, but I've scaled up many marketing teams. Even at my own agency, we work in pods, and so you can think of each pod as an autonomous full stack marketing team. So I've built many of these over the years. I've hired a ton of marketers. I've fired a ton of marketers. I've held performance reviews for a ton of marketers. So I love this question. I think my answer has evolved over the years. But if we're running with, this is a very early stage company because this is their first marketing hire, I think it's more important to look for characteristics than like job description level. Like you kind of have a choice to make, and it depends kicks in here where it's like, are you, if you're marketing to an enterprise audience, you need someone with experience. You can't find someone that's just hungry and curious and throw them at that problem. Like they're going to flail and they'll spend their time in the wrong places. I think if you are more of like a SMB product-led type of horizontal SaaS offering, then I would be looking for, it would be a 1-2 punch. I would find some sort of advisor who can spend like a very limited amount of time, call it an hour a month, to just point you in the right direction, point this person and you as the CEO in the right direction and make sure that you're avoiding common pitfalls, and you're generally pointing this junior person in the right direction. And then I'd make your first marketing hire someone who meets the characteristics of being extremely curious. I think curiosity is the most important characteristic of any marketer, or at least among the most top 3. Looking for someone who has like an incredible persistence and drive. And when you combine curiosity, persistence, and drive together, it doesn't matter what they know and what they don't know, because they're going to figure it out and they're going to try. I think there's so much information out there today around like what to do and what not to do, and how to, you can learn how to do just about anything in marketing so quickly now that I think when you're strapped on budget, like this early stage company likely is, and you're just trying to get stuff out the door and experiment, it's a personality. It's not a skill set. And that personality will develop the skill set they need. And the person that you stack above them as this advisor will make sure that they're not wasting time and burning, like chasing their own ball.
I think that is a fantastic answer. I love it. And I think probably applies to just about any kind of role that you're hiring for at that early stage. Is those characteristics are going to be what drives it. Curiosity, persistence, drive. I love this idea of, making sure you have an advisor or especially if you're going for a more junior person, that like there is a quote unquote adult in the room who's seen this before, done it before, can also help you sort of triangulate on what excellence looks like. Like that advisor could also help in this interview process. I think I would, get that advisor first before you make this hire.
Exactly. I mean, there are things that like a 25-year-old candidate is willing to do that I'm just no longer willing to do energy-wise. Like I'm just not, got a 3-week-old at home. I'm not going to invest that level of like, well, fuck, I've got to make it work because I'm trying to prove myself and like all those things that we've experienced at various stages in life. I think it's important to harness that energy when you're that size of a company, as long as you have training wheels on.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Training wheels are key in that equation, or they're just going fast as shit in the wrong direction.
See ya.
Yeah. All right, final two questions. I always keep these the same. They are intentionally vague, so take them anywhere you want. First question is, what is one tactic or strategy that founders or revenue leaders widely believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer working, no longer serving us?
I'll throw this out there as like maybe a prediction in a way. Like I think LinkedIn is dying.
Okay, spicy.
I think that 3 to 5 years ago, in the last 3 to 5 years, there was this period where some influencers were able to have the foresight to believe in building their own brand, whether it was their own company or more likely their own personal brand. You know, we're talking about like the Dave Gerhardts of the like the Drift era.
We just had him on the pod.
Yeah, perfect, great guy, great, wise in the foresight to do that. And then I think it took a long time for people to find the confidence to be like, I should do that too. And like, there's a lot of this talk about, everybody needs to be their own media company now and their own like evangelist. And I think the sentiment is correct, but I think it's too late. Everybody's doing it now. And so it's for that platform, it's too late. And I think you'll still get results and it's way better to do it than to not. But I think this vision of like, you do this and then you can become that, I think it's too noisy. And so that would be my hot take where, as you hear this all the time too, with people who are advertising on LinkedIn, like that shit is way expensive and very few people are making those unit economics work.
I've heard that again and again from the ad side. And I mean, if you look historically, it's exactly what happens with every social platform we've seen, right? Like the actual huge influencers that they came because they were like early adopters. They kind of took the risks of putting themselves out there when no one else was. And the benefit of that, taking that risk was, they got the algo juiced them. And then, sometimes keeps it going. So definitely, I even see it myself when I would share things back in the day, 7 years ago. Way more people would see it because it was just way less noisy than it is now. I wonder what it's going to evolve into. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think owned communities, like owned audiences, is going to replace. Like LinkedIn is just going to get to this place where it's so noisy that people aren't even logging in as much anymore, and it'll be all about like newsletters and Slacks. And
newsletters,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which I think is already taking root, but like I think LinkedIn will fade into the darkness until somebody replaces it.
We'll watch this back in a couple years. We'll see how LinkedIn's doing.
Joke's on you, Eli. You're wrong.
So final question, similar, but in a more, positive light. So not what is not working, but what's been working. What with some of the companies that you're working with, what's some tactic, strategy that folks listening can implement that hopefully will help them move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I was actually just on a call with 2 other like CMO level marketers. We were talking about this morning. It's funny when you zoom out and look back at like all of our histories individually and all the engagements we've done, the places that we've won are when everyone on the team was very good at the fundamentals every single day. It wasn't like some silver bullet that we found that was this magical thing that, oh my God, like what a hack. Like the hacks are gone. There's really not that much of that anymore that really makes sense or works. It's like what teams are actually able to just do consistent good work, put in the effort every single day, have a consistent velocity of experimentation and be able to measure that experimentation. Like it's just like the fundamentals done right every single day that team shows up. Those are the teams that break out and win. And so I think, especially in this market, and this ties back to like demand efficiency and these microservices, like the teams that are able to be rigorous about the way that they show up and do their work day in, day out, those are the teams that are going to put wins on the board. Those are the teams that are going to see increase in conversions. Those are the teams that are going to be able to pitch for more budget and get it from their board because like they're running a tight ship. And I think people undervalue change that can come from simply running a tight ship.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard, sometimes frustrating truth. And that that piece of content wouldn't go very viral on LinkedIn because everyone's looking for that silver bullet. And the annoying thing is go back to the basics. We just had James, the CEO of Cognizant, on here, and they're hit 50 mil ARR and they're rocking. And it's just like, we just do the basics and we do them well. And our team is working in lockstep together, and we measure and we optimize, and we're doing all the same things. We're just more consistent than others, you know?
I liken it a lot to any kind of, like, for the listeners who have been involved in sports or athletics, you know, it's like, it's about showing up for yourself and your team every single day. And like, you don't immediately see the results, but the aggregate of that effort, eventually, like, you break out from the pack. And I think teams who've ever had leaders who lead in that way and really focus on excellence in execution, as opposed to like chasing whatever thing is going to keep them from losing their job, and trying to manage up like that. It's a hard thing to do because it's not the sexy thing to focus on. Like, operational excellence doesn't sound, to your point, like it's not a LinkedIn headline.
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend of mine, and they did like a mental performance survey, and 65% of people feel like they are distracted right now. And that's because we're trying all these different like silver bullets, and things are changing all the time. And like, one of the greatest gifts I think you can give your team as a leader is the ability to focus. Like, no, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And let's be excellent at this one thing, you know? It's a superpower. Well, man, I love it. We will make sure that we put the demand efficiency framework in the show notes. I think everyone should go check that out. Definitely, if you need any design work, go hit this guy up. What's the best way to get in touch with you? Are you LinkedIn, Twitter mostly? What are you?
Yeah, mostly LinkedIn after I just finished trashing it.
LinkedIn's dead, but connect with me on LinkedIn.
Exactly. And then, yeah, to your point, if for anybody who's looking to not build an in-house design team and wants to put that on Rails, NoBoringDesign.com.
Cool. Well, thank you again, man. That was an awesome conversation. And to all those listeners, appreciate you rocking with us. Of course, listening is one thing, executing is a whole other beast. So take some of these lessons, apply it to your org, and we'll see you next week.